who's an environmental scientist at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Specifically, Sean is a district fisheries biologist with the California Department's the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Bay Delta region, where he works on inland fisheries management and monitoring in coastal counties, including San Mateo and Santa Cruz. Sean has worked with CDFW for over a decade. His work is particularly focused on monitoring steelhead trout populations in coastal streams and estuaries. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, and thanks again to the organizers of this symposium today for the invitation to come to give a speech. The title of my talk is State of the Fishery, Monitoring the San Lorenzo River Steelhead Fishery. So it's kind of a high-level kind of talk looking at the past and present of fishing in the San Lorenzo, and then a little bit about kind of the present of what we're doing to monitor the steelhead trout fishery. So let's start with the cast of characters. We're primarily going to talk about Central California coast steelhead trout in this talk. You can see a picture of what two adult steelhead look, the upper picture on this slide. This fish distinct population segment was listed as threatened in 1997 under the Federal Endangered Species Act. Just kind of stepping back, NOAA Fisheries, which is the federal agency under the Department of Commerce that manages both the anadromous fish, so those are like salmon and steelhead that go back and forth, live part of their life in the ocean, part of their life in fresh water, as well as marine fish. They have taken both salmon and steelhead kind of range-wide and broken them up into these management units. They're called distinct population segments for steelhead trout, but they're also called evolutionary significant units for salmon. So they have the ability to list individual ESUs or DPSs under the Endangered Species Act. For Central California coast steelhead trout, we're pretty far south in the range of the species, but there are actually two DPSs further south that actually extend basically essentially to the Tijuana River Basin. Presently, Central California coast steelhead trout are about 10% of their historic abundance. And it's important to just distinguish that biologically this is the same species as rainbow trout. So there are individuals in these populations that actually never go to the ocean and actually live their entire life in the stream as a resident rainbow trout, and they are capable and do reproduce with ocean-going steelhead trout. Coho salmon is kind of the other important anadromous salmonid that historically was in the San Lorenzo River. Central California coast coho salmon, which is the ESU down here, it was listed as endangered under both the state and federal Endangered Species Act. They're considered, we're at the extreme south of the range of the species, and they're considered functionally extirpated from most of the watersheds in the Santa Cruz Mountains. In fact, we're kind of lucky to have these fish still. The NOAA Fisheries actually and a local nonprofit, Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project, teamed up about 2.5 decades ago and actually established a conservation hatchery facility at an existing hatchery that Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project had on Scott Creek. And that's basically been kind of the reservoir, kind of saving the species in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And they're trying to reestablish it in watersheds currently primarily in northern Santa Cruz County, as well as in Pescadero Creek in San Mateo County. And then the other fish that I did want to mention, it's not native, but I think it's kind of part of the fish community somewhat currently in the San Lorenzo River, is king salmon or Chinook salmon. I say these fish are non-native because they historically weren't in the basin. We see kind of low numbers of these fish in a lot of years, and it's pretty evident that they're stray Central Valley hatchery Chinook salmon that are coming into the system. And for folks who might not be familiar, there's large mitigation hatcheries in the Central Valley. They're put there basically due to the dams being built, as well as the they extract, basically the state and federal water projects, the impacts that has on fish populations. So as opposed, for many of these hatcheries, as opposed to releasing these fish directly in the river to migrate downstream, they actually try to bypass mortality associated with the California Delta, which is just a labyrinth for those fish to get through. And they release those fish directly into the bay or into coastal waters like Santa Cruz Wharf. There's a release down in Monterey. There's one in Bodega Bay and Half Moon Bay as well. So these fish, they actually, when they migrate back to their natal rivers, they rely basically on a scent roadmap that they develop when they're migrating downstream as juveniles. So these fish essentially have an incomplete scent roadmap, and hence why they're straying. We do see instances of them attempting to spawn in the river, and we have seen juveniles, but it doesn't look like there's any sort of novel population getting established at this point in time. And I have some of the other kind of ecologically important native fish that aren't game species, but in the San Lorenzo River, but we have Pacific lamprey, prickly sculpin, Cochran sculpin, Sacramento sucker, and California roach. So reasons for anadromous salmonic decline in the San Lorenzo and elsewhere. Kind of really the big one is extractive timber harvest. That's pretty common across watersheds in central and northern California. Particularly damaging was the kind of the 20th century tractor logging that occurred. Just massive areas, the slopes were just clear cut, substantial erosion after this was done. Also, they were basically using the creeks as kind of logging quarters or roads to they basically removed all the roughness elements from the stream channel so they could basically just drag logs through it. So pretty damaging. The other big factor in the decline in streams, particularly down here in central and southern Santa Cruz County, is just urbanization basically these communities developed in the lower creek quarters, oftentimes building right in the floodplain. So stream channels were straightened. Obviously the big one on the San Lorenzo is the Army Corps Engineer Flood Control Project that was implemented after flooding in the 50s. So that substantially basically remade the habitat. That lower creek quarter habitat was an extremely important rearing area for these fish. And then I just put the other one that's kind of a big emerging threat, obviously range-wide for these fish, is climate change. But recent manifestations of this include the kind of current 3-decade-long mega drought that we've been in, as well as recent marine heat waves. I thought this photo was kind of cool. It's from Santa Cruz Public Libraries, but you can see some folks actually fishing the San Lorenzo River. I imagine it was probably back in the early 20th century. But I think Martin did a really good job. I want to acknowledge, obviously, the indigenous peoples of this area that undoubtedly managed and had a deeper connection with both, basically ecosystems here, but the fish populations, and use them as food, and they're important culturally. Our historical accounts of kind of what the fishery was like really began kind of in the early 20th century. And in 1905, the county of Santa Cruz basically built a hatchery, a Steelhead hatchery up in Brookdale. They actually handed operation of this facility off to our department, which was the Department of Fish and Game, in 1912. This facility operated until 1952. They actually had places where they would collect adult fish, both in the San Lorenzo as well as Scott Creek, and they would breed those fish to produce basically the juveniles for their hatchery program. But they also incorporated both eggs and brood stock from other Northern California populations where there were hatcheries, so they did intermingle the genetics quite a bit. Also during this time, it was a year-round fishery. So our department was not only planting hatchery steelhead, but we planted domesticated strains of hatchery rainbow trout. So our Mount Whitney strain rainbow trout, as well as Mount Shasta strain, which which were pretty pervasive in our hatchery system at the time. It was estimated by our department that this was kind of a booming fishery during the middle of the century. Estimated that there was upwards of 18,000 anglers that would fish the San Lorenzo annually. So really important. These folks weren't only just the folks in the county, but they're big tourism draw as well. And then in 1965, and this isn't developed from this isn't based on any sort of scientific survey, it was essentially professional opinion, but our department kind of ballparked that we thought there were about 23,000 returning adult steelhead to the San Lorenzo River annually. And then kind of more modern times, after that hatchery at Brookdale stopped operation, Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project began a hatchery program in the early 1980s that continued to about 2014. Here's the current fishing regulation from our freshwater fishing regulations booklet. You can see the season now. It's like many of the other coastal rivers in California, where you can only fish now for steelhead during the winter time period. So here it's December 1 through March 7th. You can only fish 3 days a week: Saturdays, Sundays, Wednesdays, plus legal holidays within the season, as well as opening and closing days. You must use barbless hooks. You can harvest 2 hatchery steelhead trout, which hatcheries in California, they clip the adipose fin of all hatchery steelhead trout, which is the way you distinguish them from wild fish, but there's not really a harvest opportunity in the San Lorenzo presently because there's not a hatchery operation. Also, it's important to note that there is a low-flow fishing closure in Section 8 of the fishing regulations that allows our department to close the San Lorenzo River, as well as some other area streams that are kind of grouped in and associated with that if the flows drop below 40 CFS at the Big Trees U.S. Geological Survey gauge. If folks are interested in checking flow closures during the winter, you can go to our website. We have a dashboard where you can check that. But it's a protective measure to protect these fish, obviously, during times of dry weather, drought, when these fish might be particularly negatively impacted by fishing. So jumping into getting a sense of recent population trends, there's actually not what I would call the greatest data, but we do have some metrics. This data on this slide here, you can see there's a graph. It's actually courtesy of Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project, and as part of their hatchery operation, they would collect adult steelhead at the Felton diversion to incorporate in their, basically to spawn. The Felton diversions, basically, it's a City of Santa Cruz diversion, water department diversion. It's a rubber bladder dam. There's a fish ladder that when the bladder dam's inflated, fish migrate through the fish ladder. And they put a trap in there basically to capture the returning adult steelhead trout. You can see it's a pretty broad time period operation, but particularly after 2005, the trap was operated less frequently through the season. So it's, like I said, it's not a population estimate, it's not comprehensive. And then actually when the program was, the hatchery program was suspended in 2015, there's kind of a gap where they didn't operate the trap, and now they're operating again, but it's kind of more of a science and monitoring effort currently. But you can see numbers of fish kind of range from a couple hundred individuals to upwards of 1,000 fish that were caught in some years. And then there's a line on this graph which corresponds to the right axis on that graph, and it shows basically the number of juvenile steelhead trout were released during that time period from their hatchery facility. These two graphs actually show population trends from 2 streams close by where we actually have kind of a little bit better monitoring data. The first one is Scott Creek, and National Marine Fisheries Service Southwest Fisheries Science Center has a pretty intensive monitoring program that's been going on there for about 2 decades. And they have a weir basically where they intercept returning adult steelhead trout, capture them. They do some mark and recapture of fish, but Their population estimates for that stream kind of range from, in low years, less than 100 individuals to kind of their better years, upwards of 500 fish. And you can see there's a dashed line at the top of the graph. That's actually the recovery target for these fish in the NOAA recovery plan. And then there's a corresponding graph on the right-hand side for Pescadero Creek, where we have kind of a slightly more abbreviated time series of monitoring data, but we have population estimates for that watershed as well, and you can kind of see it varies quite a bit from a couple hundred individuals to upwards of 1,000 fish. So one of the kind of really low-cost monitoring techniques that we've actually applied to not just monitoring the San Lorenzo River, but many actually other inland fisheries throughout the state is by deploying these angler survey boxes. I call them ASBs for short. But we installed 4 in the San Lorenzo River back in 2017. On the bottom of this slide, you can see what the box looks like. This is a totally voluntary survey. So we kind of rely on anglers actually, essentially self-reporting. There's basically pencils inside the lid of that box that they can fill out a form. You can see what the form looks like in the middle of the slide there. It asks for the date that the angler fished, the number of hours they fished. There's questions about what type of gear they used, whether they caught steelhead, whether they incidentally caught other fish species as well. And then it asks them to break out by size class their catch. And then at the bottom, there's some questions on angler satisfaction, which have a ranking from 1 to 5. So this slide shows some results, basically, of our decade of having these boxes deployed on the landscape. You can see there's a bar graph. There's a bar graph here that actually shows a couple different metrics. The blue is actually the number of angler reports received each season. The orange is the total number of fish that those reports indicated were caught. And then the kind of yellow, kind of golden bar, that's actually the number of what we consider legal size adult steelhead trout that were caught. So in the regulations, we consider a fish that was greater than or equal to 16 inches as an adult steelhead trout. You can kind of see there's been kind of this decreasing trend in anglers actually filling out these survey forms over the years. Catches tend to be quite variable, but typically numbers of adult steelhead reported caught are fewer than 30. I also have a line graph on there which corresponds to the right axis, but it's actually the catch rate that fishermen or anglers reported catching. It's measured in fish per an hour, but it varies quite a bit from about 0.2 fish per an hour to greater than 0.5 fish per an hour. I'll also say that anglers predominantly reported being satisfied overall with the fishery, and that our most popular fishing locations in the watershed are in the gorge, at least by the number of reports that we receive. So that's the Rincon and Ox Trail boxes. And then fly fishing appears to be the most popular fishing method, followed by lures and then bait. Kind of one other method that we collect data on steelhead fisheries throughout the state is with this steelhead report and restoration card. So this is actually required beyond having a fishing license to fish for steelhead trout. You have to get this, pay for this additional report card, and anglers are required to fill it out and return it each year. So you can look at this report card, and it's basically asks that anglers each time they go fishing fill out the date that they fish, and then there's a location code which corresponds to, basically can be a specific stream or a grouping of streams. The San Lorenzo River has its own code, so we can kind of break out the data. And then it asks for the number of wild fish kept, the number of hatchery fish, the number of wild fish released, because you must release wild fish, the number of hatchery fish kept, or the number of hatchery steelhead released, as well as hours fished. We actually have been compiling this data as it comes back to us over the years. There's a dashboard actually on our website where you can go and look at recent reporting data. I pulled this straight off the website. It shows results from the San Lorenzo River. I will state that we have been finding that despite the fact that it's mandated that anglers return their report cards, it's typically fewer than 40% of anglers actually return their report cards each year. You can kind of see the number of fishing trips in the San Lorenzo per year, kind of in that left-hand bar plot. It's pretty variable. It goes from fewer than 100 trips reported annually to over 500. It breaks down catch by month. Interestingly, people are reporting fishing outside the season, or maybe that's just erroneous data being entered, but there's obviously there's some misunderstanding of the fishing regulations from time to time. And then total steelhead catch by season, again, is quite variable. In some of the better years, it's reported that close to 400 fish have been caught, but in many years it's fewer than 100 adult steelhead trout that are actually caught. So as you can see, kind of through those two methodologies that we're currently collecting data on the fishery, they're less than perfect. We have pretty low reporting rates. I think our angler survey box reporting rates are even lower than the steelhead report card rates. And we can kind of battling in a department, kind of bringing us into the modern era and actually finding a way to collect data on fisheries, kind of using a more modern technique, and that's where this comes in. This is the California Inland Recreational Angler Survey. We call it CIRRUS for short, but it's basically being applied to all inland fisheries throughout the states. That's just not just unique to the San Lorenzo River. It's basically very similar to the angler survey box form, but this is basically an angler survey that you can access through either the web or on a mobile device. And kind of I'll jump to the next slide here, but this is what the platform looks like. And it's actually kind of got two dashboards on it. You can see it on the right-hand side in that computer screen. There's the enter survey data, which actually allows you, after you fish, to enter kind of a report on your fishing trip. But then there's also the ready to fish dashboard. And I think this is really gets a little bit more at the goals. We not only want to modernize this system and increase reporting, but we really want to kind of make it transparent and kind of being able to engage anglers and actually give them some value from this. So that ready to fish button essentially allows them to look at public waters throughout the state, see basically at different fisheries how many reports have been filed. They can also look at the number of basically things like catch rates, different species that have been caught at different fisheries. There's also a feature there where you can actually use kind of like a geographic kind of radius filter. So you can look at basically, if you're interested in fishing opportunities around Watsonville, you can filter it that way and look at, basically in a 5-mile or 10-mile distance of Watsonville, what fishing opportunities are available. To promote this, we've been attempting basically to put signage out on the landscape. And I'll kind of jump back to, we piloted this CIRRUS effort actually 2 years ago in the North Central region, and we're now rolling it out statewide this present year. And we've been trying to get signage basically at what we deem important public fishing access locations. You can see in the right-hand slide there kind of what the signage looks like. Oftentimes it's metal. It's got a QR code that you can use your cell phone camera basically to access the survey in the field and file a report. Also on the left-hand side, that shows one of our existing angler survey boxes on the San Lorenzo River. We basically just put these stickers over top of the angler survey box, so if folks choose, they can use that QR code and file a report. We still have the paper surveys out there as well. Curiously, this year, reporting was better with the paper surveys than with the Cirrus platform. So we got to get the word out. Looking to the future, this is kind of professional opinion. I could be looking at it through too rosy a color glasses. We obviously don't have good metrics on the adult fish population in the San Lorenzo River. I will say that the City of Santa Cruz Water Department, as well as the County of Santa Cruz, with their efforts, and Don Alley's been heading the sampling efforts there, but there's really good surveys on juvenile fish numbers throughout the system, but we don't have a grip on truly what the adult population size is. If I had to guess, it's probably somewhere from several hundred individuals in lower number years to probably upwards of 1,000. If I had really rosy colored glasses on, perhaps it's 2,000 in Vanner years, but I will say there's still a possibility that there could be a hatchery supplementation in the system. Monterey Bay Salmon and Trout Project is still interested and have been engaged with both state and federal agencies about a hatchery program. Ultimately, I think it would probably look a bit different than the historic hatchery operations. It's got to be balanced with species recovery of steelhead trout. So yes, it could supplement the population in the future. There would be maybe a harvest opportunity for these fish, but the way the hatchery is going to be run is basically to promote natural fish recovery as best as possible. And then I'll point folks to actual information as far as habitat recovery and species recovery. There's the NOAA recovery plans. You can see that kind of in the middle of the slide. The steelhead's kind of lumped in this multi-species plan, but there's also the CCC coho salmon recovery plan as well as our governor put out this document. It's kind of a broader plan, but it's the California Salmon Strategy for a Hotter, Drier Future. It was published, I think, about 2 years ago. But it's got some applicable stuff in there that definitely apply to coastal watersheds like the San Lorenzo as well. And I'll just say, in terms of actually recovering these fish, there's a lot of work to be done. I'm not going to get into specifics, but from a monetary perspective, it's going to take a lot of money, and it's definitely going to take a bit of reimagining how we live in these landscapes and interact with these watersheds and kind of what they currently look like, which versus what they need to look like in the future. And with that, I'll conclude, and I'm happy to take questions. It's like Chris has a question. Yeah, we were. So the question that Chris had was regarding planning for basically a larger and kind of more kind of modern recovery hatchery for coho salmon. And yes, we have been involved with the planning. And there, several years ago, there was basically a project basically to do kind of some feasibility studies of some potential sites, and looking at the size of those sites, water supplies, what have you, and the feasibility of building basically a hatchery. Like, I think it was the production, they wanted to produce 70,000 juveniles for release every year. They narrowed down some sites potentially, but I wouldn't say in terms of future funding, there's no funding at this stage to go beyond that. So that document's, yeah, hopefully we can pick up on that in the future.
So you had the years 2018 and 2019 and on a couple slides where there was a big bump. It looked like in the numbers. Do you have an explanation for that?
So the question is, there was, in some of the slides, it looks like fish numbers were a bit higher in the 2018 and 2019 time period. And if I have an explanation for that, I don't have a great explanation for that. It is curious, like it followed obviously the like 13 through 16 drought period. So some of those fish were definitely produced during that time frame, but yeah, fish numbers seem to rebound quite a bit. We obviously had rain during that time, which is definitely helpful. I don't, I'm not a marine conditions person, but oftentimes when you get bigger numbers of fish returns, marine conditions, advantageous marine conditions are definitely involved.
I don't have a question, but people are curious about the Monterey Bay Salmon Trout Project. The website is mbstp.org. So if you're curious about current activity at the hatchery, you know, check the website. Yeah, yesterday we released 5,000 fillet salmon, and there's several more. So if you want to volunteer, you can go to that website as well and help release a couple of salmon in Scott Creek.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting rid of the levees down here anytime soon. We've done in that environment to make it more, given what we have to, the constraint, what could be done there? The lower San Lorenzo.
So the question applies to the flood control project in the lower San Lorenzo River, the levees, and what can be done to improve habitat there. It's a kind of the $10 million question, at least to me, in the system, if you really want to improve fish numbers. But yeah, I mean, I think probably there's things that are currently being done in terms of how vegetation is managed in the flood control channel to basically allow for more cover and kind of fish habitat kind of structure. That said, that's kind of, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if that's a lot. I think it's probably in the long run going to take some adjustment and kind of figuring out how to kind of come to kind of some new balance between flood control in these systems and fish habitat. And yeah, we're not there yet.
Yeah, looking at the earlier slides on the fish numbers, you know, in the 50s, the hatchery was producing fish for the recreational fishery, I presume just like, you know, and then that hatchery ceased operation like sometime in the mid to late 1950s. And then we had a slide up there from 65 that said there were 26,000 adults coming back into the system. But the hatchery wasn't producing those fish. But my thought is more like conditions weren't that great in the mid-60s for habitat. So what accounts for all those fish, and why haven't we seen those kinds of numbers recently? It was after a few wet years.
Yeah, so the question was about the early hatchery operation at Brookdale, and that hatchery basically going out of operation in 52, but we still had lots of fish during the 1960s time period, and why does it look so different now versus kind of then? And yeah, you're right, basically the degradation had already started. Having not been alive and being able to see it, and actually having the historical accounts or maybe talking to folks who were around then, I don't have a great sense of kind of what the differences are, but there are more people and more development in kind of the system than the 60s. So the watershed does look still a bit different. And then kind of the other thing I'll reference with these, with like Pacific salmon in particular, you'll hear of kind of the extinction vortex referenced a lot of times where the degradation occurs, but there's kind of this cyclic, it's kind of like this increasing downward trend, but within that there's little spikes in the population as we kind of keep going along. And I kind of think that's kind of some of what's kind of happened over the years. So it's just kind of been a slow and steady decline. And I think that's
all we
it.
got for today.